very much. We're going to move to our first presentation, and we're going to introduce Dr. Elisabeth Klatzer. She is a feminist economist at Vienna University and Harvard University. Elisabeth has more than 20 years of experience working in research, advocacy, and consultancy in the field of gender-responsive budgeting, feminist economics, and economic policy. Working as a freelance consultant and researcher, she's also the co-founder of the European Gender Budgeting Network and Austrian civil society group Femme Fiscale, a research and advocacy group on gender budgeting and feminist economic policy. So I'm just going to hand over to Elisabeth and you'll have control. Please go ahead, Elisabeth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Welcome to all of you. It's a privilege for me to be with you and to give you an overview of what gender budgeting is. This is intended to provide you the full picture, and later on during our workshop, we will get in details of every of these points. So the first point is, sorry, let me just check the slides because I want you to see what I'm talking about. Yes, here we go. So the first point is that gender budgeting, gender responsive budgeting is good budgeting. This is, so what I will be talking about is not a separate system or anything that you do aside, but it's simply doing the way how you are planning budgets and implementing the programs is done in a way to be better in the sense of integrating fully gender perspectives. So my talk is going to address this question: what is gender budgeting to achieve these better budgeting ways, and also address why is it useful in your context. At least I hope that you will get this notion by what I'm going to tell you. And actually, I want to use this picture here. Please take a close look. I want to use this picture to talk about what is gender budgeting. So what we see here is a gardener watering flowers. And actually there is a lot of references to the distribution of money as well. This guy here, this gardener says, I don't make a difference. I treat everybody equal. Well, actually, that is what we hear very often about budgeting as well. I do not make any difference. Everybody is treated equally, so there is equality. That's the notion behind it. But actually, this assumption is not true, and much less so when we talk about gender issues. So let's have a closer look. First, I would like to invite you to look at the flowers. Actually, what we see here is a broad diversity, from the cactus to flowers needing a lot of water to green plants. And this diversity actually is an analogy to the diversity of people, of men and women, and different groups of men and women, and also diversity among your beneficiaries. It's not all the same, but very different, some small, some large. Maybe like in this picture, maybe there are some flowers even hidden behind larger ones. For example, small women's initiatives in your context. Does the water really reach them? Are they seen? Is there enough funding for the needs of smaller organizations as well? So it's the diversity that is one aspect. Taking a closer look to see the diversity, we will see that gender analysis will help a lot to get this closer picture of the beneficiaries intended. Second point is the water. How is the water distributed here? Quite indifferently, treating everybody equal, everybody receiving the same amount, but it becomes clear from this picture that is not a very efficient use of the water, because some get too much and others possibly too little. Third point I see here in this picture. Where is this man, the gardener, looking? Well, actually in the air, being very happy, looking in the air. But what we need is to take a closer look. As I said, to do a good gender budget analysis, to know about the situation on the ground, the needs and priorities of women and men, and only then we get a good notion of what is best funding to meet the needs and priorities. Actually, another point is, which possibly for you is not so important, but another point is the question of how much water is there in the cans. Possibly you at your level are not able to influence that a lot, but it makes a huge difference, both for you as foundations, but also for governments, of what is the revenue, how much money is there to distribute. And another point which I think is interesting here, there is only one person which is doing the job, but often it needs different persons, especially also with different competencies, to really do a good gardening or also a good budgeting. Like, is there people involved who have gender competencies, who have financial competencies? And also, on the other hand, is there mechanisms that there is a participatory decision-making about where the funds go? Possibly not relevant in all cases. One more point, pouring the water might not be enough. The plants might have different needs to be cared for in the longer run, especially if it's the smaller plants needing fertilizers and special support. Possibly smaller women's organizations might need continuous support to grow well, to be able to do their tasks effectively. Last point, which I find is also interesting in this picture, is by pouring the water indifferently and not looking, there is possibly water waste. That's an inefficient use of the water if there is water being just going somewhere where it's not needed. So by identifying this water waste, you might be able to increase effectiveness and efficiency of spending. And in the longer term, the looking closely actually helps to influence the flourishing. And here you see again the circles around these aspects I talked about, all with analogies in the budgeting. By doing it well, we actually make a difference. You can make a difference by looking closely on whom you want to serve. And that is actually all the tools of gender budgeting help you to do this job well and really make a difference. Do better budgeting, better use of the funds available, as said earlier. In the second part, I want to cover quickly a few key concepts when we talk about gender budgeting or working towards gender equality. So one key is to understand that there is two different approaches, two different approaches which need to be combined, so-called twin track approach. One is in the regular programs and budgets, ensuring that gender equality is integrated fully to reach best results. That's what we understand by mainstreaming. Gender mainstreaming is the overall integration of gender equality in the programming, and gender budgeting specifically combining programming and budgeting. But there is a second aspect, which is targeted funding. So this is the question of ensuring that there is also specific targeted funds and programs and projects, if needed, to redress and reduce gender gaps or support women with very specific needs. That can have very different forms, be it specific programs to promote women in a certain area, to fight key discrimination or problems like funding for projects combating violence against women, or promoting certain groups of women to, like smaller NGOs, to reach the targets who are working on gender equality. The main components of gender budget work are gender budget analysis. As I said earlier, if we want to have a closer look, it's very good to use instruments of gender budget analysis as a starting point to know what the situation is, the needs, priorities, what the gaps are, and to know how to change the funding programs and how to better allocate the finances and resources available. And the third building block you see on this image is systematic integration of gender budgeting in the planning and budgeting process. That's actually what in the longer term your foundations can do, just to have a regular process of integration and doing budgeting from a gender perspective. We actually will work a lot on that during our time together. There is very good standards of gender budgeting available, and internationally actually. And within these standards, there is a set of different tools for doing gender budgeting, which are here grouped by tools which are done ex ante, meaning before you start the budgeting process, like, for example, a gender needs assessment, gender impact assessment, or a baseline analysis for budgeting, and other tools. Then there is the concurrent tools, meaning this is tools and instruments which you use while doing the budgeting, especially the planning of the budgeting. It's the question of what is the performance objectives and which performance targets do you want to set from a gender equality perspective, how many resources are allocated, possibly do a budget incidence analysis, namely looking at who receives how much of the funds, or using gender marker typologies to categorize funds going to different projects depending on how much they contribute to gender equality. And equally, in the third column, you see instruments which are used ex post, meaning after the budgeting decisions and budgeting implementation. So this has a lot to do with auditing and evaluation, ex post gender impact assessments to know what actually the outcomes are, doing gender audits, spending reviews, and the like. And we will talk more in detail about some of these instruments. So I talked so much about gender budget analysis, and here you see again these key steps of gender budget analysis, which starts with understanding the existing gender differences, needs, and priorities, and then look at the programs, whether they reflect these differences, needs and priorities, namely asking the question, is the spending and the budgeting, are the programs actually reaching women and men to increase equality? Are they actually reducing the gaps identified? And a third step is, are the budget allocations actually adequate to address the gender needs? Is it enough, or is there possibly a reallocation of budgets to have enough funds for the needs that you identify and the gender inequalities that you want to address with the funding you are giving out? So to come to an end, a last aspect I would like to cover with you is that gender equality perspectives are integrated throughout the whole budget cycle. So doing good budgeting means using gender perspectives in the planning stage and decision-making, adoption of how the funds are used, but equally follow up in the implementation stage when actually the funds are dispersed. How are they used in detail? How are the projects set up? Do they have good gender equality objectives? And in the implementation, is there a focus on promoting gender equality? Are the objectives met, measured by indicators, measured, and that brings us to the last stage, which is the monitoring and evaluation. What are actually the impacts by using your funds in terms of impacts on improving gender equality and closing gaps? And again, there is a series of tools, as I said earlier, to monitor well and do an evaluation to follow up what the benefits are of the funds being spent, because, as we said earlier, we want to make a difference, and you can make best the difference if you know in the end what are the results. So in the next cycle you can take this into account and even improve the already well done budgeting in the sense of increasing gender equality. So this actually is already the end of my brief introduction. As I said earlier, we will come back to all this later in more detail throughout the workshop. And now I just want to encourage you to take a few minutes to reflect on what you have heard now and take note of what's the most important learning or insight for you. But also please take note of the questions or notes to yourself where you want